Hello and welcome to a mastery video. I'm Grace here at the Quilting Bee in Spokane, Washington, and we are going to be showing you today an introduction to the advanced Janome lineup. This is meant to be a mastery for people who have never touched their machine before, or people who have used their machine but maybe just used basic functions and want to get a more thorough introduction to their machine. We are showcasing here the Janome Horizon 9480 and the Continental M8, but this lesson is going to be applicable to people who have a Skyline S9, a Skyline S7, and really anybody who has this type of screen, including ELNA owners as well. You're going to be following along. I recommend that you start your class with a little bit of fabric. I've got 2 layers of quilting cotton here because we're going to be going through activities and I will give you time to stitch along with me. Feel free to pause me at any time to catch up or repeat what I've said, but we're just going to be cranking right along. We're going to go through the utility functions of the machine, how to read your screen, what do I buttons do, all the most important uses of the machine for utility functions. Then we'll have a decorative section, do a little bit of decorative stitching. We'll do some practical stuff. We'll play with your most important feet, buttonhole foot, darning foot, AccuFeed foot, and then we'll finish out with cleaning, maintenance, and settings. So with all that said, let's get right into it. All right, so first we're going to need to plug in our machine. We've got our power cord here, and you can see that it's a puzzle piece. It's got a square end and a circular end. And the port also has a square end and a circular end. And so I just match up the puzzle piece, plug it in. And then on most of the machines, you'll have your foot control port right above that. And that's a little circle matches circle, plug that in. On the M8, M7, and M6, you'll see that you've still got your power cord right next to the power button, but your foot control port goes right there. It's easy to find because there's really just one circular port that fits in. So we'll first start by winding a bobbin on the 9480, which will also stand in for the Skyline S7 and the S9. To take out your bobbin, we're going to push this little black spring to the right, and the cover pops up and we'll grab our bobbin. Okay, so we'll hold on to that for 1 second. Now we're going to put our spool of thread on the spool stand. And we'll immobilize it with a spool cap. You'll notice I picked a relatively small spool cap so that it doesn't create a friction point where the thread has to bend up and over the large spool cap. To start, we're going to go under this metal lever and then follow this design to the left. Now, if you have a Skyline, you will also have a little wiggle you do, slalom around a plastic piece and then a metal piece, and then you end up coming toward the back. The 9480 is a little bit simplified. You just come leftward and then around the back here. And you can even see this nice dotted line showing a bobbin. Okay, now at this point, on this particular machine, as well as the Skylines, I want you to grab the thread where it comes off the spool. And I've got 2 hands on the thread now, and we do a little floss motion. The reason is this is where the thread goes under the tension spring, but you can't see the thread going in there. And so you have to really make sure by flossing that it's now tensioned. Okay, then we come straight over to the bobbin winding pin. I can grab my bobbin and I can pop it on there. I take about 6 inches of thread and I wind it clockwise around the bobbin, say 5 or 6 times. Then when I'm down to my last little bit of thread, I find one of the slots that are cut in the platform. You've got 3 slots cut here, and I tuck it behind one of the slots. And as I pull toward the base of the slot, it's going to hold the thread and then cut the thread. So that holds that for me. And now I can push the bobbin winding pin over against the stopper, and now I'm in bobbin winding mode. If I push on the foot pedal right now, I'll start winding a bobbin. So now we're going to wind a bobbin on the M6 or M7 or M8. We start by putting our spool here. I don't actually need to put a spool cap on it because gravity is going to hold it on. I go up to my guide. I make sure that this is raised all the way up. And then I take the thread over to the tensioning spring. And this is what I was talking about on the 9480 and the Skylines. You can see really clearly here, you have to get under a spring. I call this the cup and the saucer. This is the cup and that's the saucer. I go under the cup, but over the saucer. And I need 2 hands for this so that it really pops under there. That's what you're doing on the 9480 when you're flossing. That's now tensioned, and I take my tail over to the bobbin. I wind again 5 or 6 times around, and then I go under one of the slots in the platform, and it cuts my thread for me. On this machine, we push the bumper towards the bobbin rather than pushing the bobbin toward the bumper, and then I would start pushing on the bobbin winding button here, and it would rotate, and when it was done, this would pop away and stop the machine. On the 9480, you stop the machine. It does not stop itself, so you have to let off the foot pedal or hit the stop button. When our bobbin is wound, we're going to go ahead and put it in the bobbin basket. And when we put it in, we have to make sure it's going in the right way. There's no marking on these bobbins. There's no J or Janome. And so we have to double check our orientation. The way I do that is I pull on the tail. If the bobbin rotates counterclockwise, I'm good to go. Another way to think about that is it makes a P for perfect, tail and head of the P, not a lowercase q for quit that. So we wanted a P for perfect, and I drop it in the basket. And for all of the Skylines and the Continental M's, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to watch your thread and make sure it drops into that slot that's right at 630. And you're going to be going around this little metal finger. So you have both of those things are happening at the same time, and the thread is traveling in between a spring and a metal plate. Okay, pull leftward, and I'm now naturally on this track that takes me around to a cutter, and I cut my thread off. I'll do that one more time a little bit faster. Drop it in, bring the thread so that it drops into that slot at 630, around the metal finger, and cut. Then we can cover that plate up just like that. And that is true for all the Janome machines that we're talking about today. Now we're going to thread the machine, and we're going to start with the 9480. I have my spool on the spool pin. You'll notice the thread is coming off the bottom of the spool. I think of it as the toilet paper's on backwards. This is not super important. There's so many other things we can do wrong that'll affect the stitch before we get to this, but that is how your manual tells you to put it on. We're going to start the same way as winding a bobbin. We go under this metal hook and around the top. But here's where we diverge. We're going to come forward instead of going backwards. If you have a Skyline, you're still going to do the slalom around the plastic and then the metal. But then you're going to come forwards just like this. Okay, now at this point, I always check my presser foot. You want your presser foot to be up. Let's point out real quick. Here's your presser foot up down button. And I push it, make sure that foot is up. Okay. We do that so that we release tension right here. And now as I thread downward, I'm really getting that thread in there. Come around and back up. This is where we aim for the take-up lever. If you cannot see your take-up lever, you can rotate your hand wheel until you see it pop up into view. Then you're going to take your thread in along the right side, out along the left side, and it catches into the take-up lever. Thread with authority at this stage. You might even consider holding your thread back here because there is resistance on the take-up lever, and if you're not authoritative about it, it doesn't actually pop fully into the take-up lever, and the first thing it does is fall out and you get a big nest. I know it's in there because it's dangling. It didn't fall back down and droop on that side. From here, I'm headed for the needle. I've got 2 seat belts. Seat belt number 1, enter from the right, and seat belt number 2 right above the needle. Enter from the right as well. This second seat belt, it's important that you pull all the way into that left-hand hole. That's important for getting your needle threader to work. We'll pause there and we'll come back and thread the needle threader in a second. All right, So now we're going to go over threading the Continental machines, M6, M7, M8. And again, we're going to check that our presser foot is up. Now, because we're on our second go around, we're going to add some nuance. Have you ever noticed that you have a lever back here and it sometimes will lift the foot, and then at other times it appears to be useless and it's flopping around back there? That all has to do with how you raised the presser foot. This is a manual control, and so if you raised the foot electronically, the manual control was never engaged. So if you would like to be able to use this lever, you need to make sure that the foot is lowered electronically, and then if you raise it manually, you've got control over that lever. Either way, end up with your foot in the up position. For threading the Continentals, we start the same way. We go up to our guide, and this time we're going down to our paper clip. Again, we have a really nice picture on the top showing us how that goes. Then I'm going to slide behind this stopper and behind this metal hook here. Again, down along the right side, U-turn, up. If we don't see the take-up lever, we rotate our hand wheel until we can, and then again, authoritatively, in along the right, out along the left. Straight down, and same two seat belts. Seat belt number 1, seat belt number 2, and pull all the way to the left. At this point, we're going to use our needle threader. I differentiate between threading the machine and threading the needle threader because they are different in their setup. At this point, I lower the foot to get it out of the way. I also check that my needle is all the way up. I could grab my hand wheel and turn the needle, but let's learn another button. We've got a button right here. It'll look the same on the 9480. It's two triangles. And when I push it, the needle will go down or up. And right now it goes down. So I push it again, it's up. That puts our needle in its highest position. I always want you to check that. Even if you think you left it in the highest position, please just always check that for me. At this point, we need to go into a little jaw. See the black upper jaw and the white lower jaw? If you have an older machine, those are probably metal, or they're the same colored plastic. Same thing, you still have a jaw. You're gonna go into the jaw, and you might also at the same time have another guide that's showing you like a number 7, and it shows you going up and over. Doesn't matter. You can follow those arrows and numbers, but the really important thing is that it's caught into that jaw, and there's usually a little tooth that you catch behind. You can't see a tooth on here, but if you have one of those metal jaws, you'll see a little tooth poking out, and you got to pull to the left so it pops behind the tooth. Then you can cut your thread off. Blink. We're all ready to go, and you have either a lever here, or on the Continentals, it's here. You push down, 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 and then release, and it's threaded the needle. Some thoughts about the needle threader. Number 1, it works on size 8012, 9014, 116 needles. It's not rated for use on 7010s or lower. So if it works, great, but if it doesn't work on those, it's not meant to, and Janome considers it a perfectly functioning needle threader as long as it threads size 8012s and up. So just be aware of that. If you find that it's not threading, I would prefer that you not repeatedly slam it down. You can bend the little wire that pushes through the eye. So you can get your magnifying glass out and push it down gently and see is the little wire going to the left or right of the needle. You might even be able to see that here. Oh, no, this one gets in the way. But you might be able to see if that wire is missing the eye, and you can kind of bend it back. Or you could visit your friendly local service center and see if they can bend or replace that for you. At this point, I just pull an extra little inch of thread out, put it under the foot, and we are ready to go. All right, so to get started, we're going to look at our screen, and I want you to tell me, how can you tell what's going to happen when I push on the foot pedal? Am I going to get a straight stitch, a zigzag stitch, or what? So there's 2 right answers to this. You could have said that you saw the straight stitch in the stitch illustration here. That would be the right answer. Or you could say, I see that I have a category, utility category, and the number 1 is selected, and that shows me a straight stitch. Both of those are correct. Very good. So we'll just make sure that our machine is stitching. We'll put our fabric under the foot, and sew a little bit. And all sounds good and looks good. If it does not sound good or look good, go ahead and rethread for me and then come back. Now, how did I know that I wasn't going to break a needle? Basically, there's no foot that Janome makes that's going to break a needle on a centered straight stitch. But just in case, we could have checked. I have a recommended foot right here. This is the A foot, and I am using the A foot. The picture is really picture perfect. You cannot tell it is the A foot while it's on. You have to actually take it off to see the letter, and I'll show you that when we take that foot off in a little bit. Okay, sew a little bit more, and we'll set some preferences. So first of all, we will want to set whether our needle is stopping in the up or the down position. Did you notice that every time you start and stop, your needle is consistently stopping either down or always up? Mine is set to always down, and yours probably is because that's how they come from the factory. If you would like to switch that, we're going to go to our settings, which is a gear. No matter Continental or 9480, it is a gear. If you have a Skyline, it's a wrench, and it's probably a wrench that says set next to it. Either way, gear or wrench, tap that, and you come to our settings page. We've got 3 categories: machine, sewing, and language. We're going to go to the sewing settings, which is the center category. And you'll notice that we have a needle stop position. I believe for every machine that is in the same first page, but if you do need to turn pages, you can see somewhere on your screen that you've got 1 out of 6 or 1 out of 4, and then you should have arrow keys somewhere that show you how to transition between pages. You're going to find needle stop position, and you can swap it if you want, and then we'll hit OK. So that's the first preference you might set. Then I prefer to be able to turn corners easily using the pivot setting. So either way, you're going to have a little icon with a needle in the fabric and the foot is raised above the fabric. We're going to turn that on. It either turns yellow or light blue. And now, let me start over. I'll get us a fresh shot. When I stop and the needle stops down, the foot raises up. If your needle stops up, it will not raise up. This has to be when you have that needle stop down setting. And I can turn a corner super duper easy. And then to lower the foot, I just push on the foot control. I don't have to push any buttons. Just like that. So that is an optional quick toggle on off option right there. Okay, the last preference you might set right away is your speed. Your speed control is this slider right here. And this controls how fast the machine runs when you floor your foot pedal. So if I floor my foot pedal with the slider all the way to the right, I go as fast as possible. If I floor it with the slider all the way to the left, I go really, really slow. That's me flooring that foot pedal. So you can set your own preference. I'll have mine right in the middle. Okay. Now let's look at the stitching that we've been doing. Standard straight stitch, and hopefully when you look at that, you say, yep, that looks like every straight stitch I've ever done in my life. The question is, what is the length of this standard straight stitch? Look at the 2 values that you have on screen. One says 4.5, one says 2.4. Which one is the length? Hopefully you answered 2.4. That's something you just learned by rote. Don't feel bad if you didn't know that. But that is a millimeter value. So 2.4 millimeters between every step forward. And the icon shows lines getting further apart, or on certain machines, it'll show a straight stitch getting longer. Either way, that is length. We are going to see just how long this stitch can go. You can turn a knob if you have one, or you can use the little plus icon and push and hold until the machine beeps at you. That little double beep is its no beep. It means it can't do whatever you're asking it to. All right, so we're up to 5, and we're going to sew a line of basting. Go ahead and do that with me. Excellent. And you can peek at your fabric, and we've got this nice long straight stitch. It's 5 millimeters long. Like I said, this is called a basting stitch, and it is used to tack layers together, temporarily usually. And then you would go in after the fact and stitch it down again. You would confirm, that's where I want that seam to go. Now I'm actually going to sew the seam. To do that, you're going to need to reset your length. We're at 5 right now, and notice it is off colored to let me know that that is not a default setting. There's a couple ways we could go back to 2.4. If I remembered that I came from 2.4, I could bink, 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 go back to 2.4 manually, and it would turn black to show me I was back at default. But that's a lot of clicking, and especially if I don't even know where I came from. There's 2 easy ways to do this. Number 1, you can just press the default button. Now the 9480 owners have this the easiest. It just says DFT right on their screen. If you have a Skyline S7 or S9, you are going to open your optional settings using this up arrow right here. And it might be blue on your screen, but you still have an up arrow right above those numbers. And then you'll see a little DFT and you can push that to go back to default. If you have a Continental, you have a different icon. It is a triangle with a plus and a minus, and it sits kind of over by your stitch illustration. And we'll show that on the screen now. This is the icon I'm talking about. We press this, and you can see we have our DFT. I'm going to call that the More Options button, and I'm going to reference it a bunch during class. So this is a good time to jot down a picture of that, sketch that out, and write More Options, because every time I say, now go to your More Options menu, that is what I'm referencing. There is one other way to set back to default, which is actually even easier, because for the majority of us, it's 2 clicks to reset back to default, where you have to open More Options and then hit a DFT button. So for those people, if you've got an alternate stitch length, you can just reselect stitch number 1. It reloads from the machine memory, and we're right back at our original settings. That resets everything. We're talking tension, presser foot pressure, length, width, all of it. You're all back to default. Okay, so now we've got this other value, this 4.5. So what does that refer to? A lot of people will say width, and they're not totally wrong, but technically a straight stitch doesn't have a width, because if it did, it would be a zigzag. A straight stitch has 0 zig, 0 zag. So what this really is called needle position. Right now, your needle is centered, and make sure that you can see that physically with your needle. What happens if we take the 4.5 as low as it can go? You can use your minus button, or if you have the knobs, find the knob with a little zigzag icon above it. And we're going to make that number go as low as it can go. Okay, what number did you get to? Hopefully we all got to 0. And where did your needle end up? It should have ended up all the way to the left. You can see it in my illustration. You can see it physically on my machine. My needle is all the way to the left. So 0's far to the left. What's all the way to the right? Make that number as high as it can go. You should end up at 9, and your needle is all the way to the right. Again, this is a millimeter value. You have 9 millimeters of range to move your needle, and 4.5 is right in between 0 and 9. So 4.5 is centered. You can go ahead and reset back to default. You can either hit your DFT, open up your more settings or more options and hit DFT, or you can just reload your stitch there. Okay. Now, a common follow-up question is, why would I move my needle around? Why would I change away from 4.5? I have one really compelling reason for you, and that has to do with the 1/4 inch. So let's change tacks here real quick and talk about doing a 1/4 inch on your Janome. So you can use you can do a 1/4 inch with just the A foot and the regular plate. You don't need any special tools. So I removed the foot for easier viewing. You should be able to see a hatch mark right up by your feed dogs. And then you have 3 down here by your bobbin cover. And we want the leftmost hatch mark. So leftmost hatch mark by the feed dogs, those are in a line, and right in between there happens to be a little unmarked hatch mark that's also a 1/4 inch. That is what we're going to be using. We're going to use our regular A foot, and we're going to run one of the edges of our sample fabric along those hatch marks. Go ahead and try a 1/4 inch. I promise I won't judge. And there you go. Now, I mentioned that you can do this like this because if you go to quilt retreat and you forget all your feet, the weekend isn't ruined. You can still do a 1/4 inch. But this isn't the specialist 1/4 inch tool that Janome really envisions you doing a 1/4 inch with. So we are now going to talk more in depth about the specialist 1/4 inch tool. All right, this is the specialist tool I'm talking about. This is the O foot. And I know it's the O foot because it says O right by the attachment point. And it has a little black guide on it. The O2 foot, which you may or may not already own, looks the same but no black guide. We're going to swap out for this foot. I swap feet by pushing on a little black lever at the very back of the shank. So this is the presser foot, this is the shank, and at the back of your shank, there's a black lever. Push towards myself, and the foot falls off. To put the new foot on, my preferred method is to do a controlled landing onto the presser foot. So the way I do that is I lower the foot, or excuse me, I lower the shank, then I raise the shank using that manual lever in back, slide the foot under, and then we are going to lower the shank manually and gently and slowly onto that bar, shifting the foot as needed so that it really clicks in. All right, O foot is on. Now, the very first thing that you are going to notice is that doesn't look like a 1/4 inch. We put the fabric under there. This time the fabric's going to bonk right up against that metal guide. That's what that guide on the foot is. And you don't have to be an expert on quilting to say that that looks more like a 1/2 inch seam allowance to you. You're absolutely right. This foot is not meant to be used with a centered needle. So we need to move the needle, or in this case, we're actually going to go to a different stitch that moves the needle for us. We are going to go to our quilt category. We go one category over to these decorative scrolls, and it gives us some options, and we're going to find the quilt category. If you need to turn pages on your particular machine, remember you've got arrow keys to do that. Inside the quilt category, it should be stitch number 2. It says 1/4 inch P. We do not want 7mm 1/4 inch if yours is marked like that. We just want straight 1/4 inch P. And you will see that it has moved your needle over. Notice here, your needle's off to the right, much closer to a 1/4 inch. And now, let's try it again all together. We're all going to run our fabric up against the metal guide and sew a 1/4 inch. And when you're done, you can cut your threads using that scissor icon and look at your work. So what I think of this 1/4 inch is that it's nice, it's consistent, but it is very wide. I would call it a true 1/4 inch as opposed to a scant 1/4 inch. A lot of us quilters want a scant 1/4 inch, which is narrower. The good news is there is room to adapt. Notice the value for your needle position. Do you see the 8.3? Remember that we could go to 9. I am going to max out the rightward position of the needle. So I'm going to go all the way to 9 with that value. Basically, I've moved the needle closer to the edge of the fabric rather than moving the edge of the fabric closer to the needle. So let's all make that change. And then I'll have you stitch again right next to the stitching you just did. What you should notice is that your new stitching is a thread's width narrower or closer to the edge than the previous stitching. It's literally 0.7 of a millimeter, so it is going to be a very subtle difference, but it's usually enough to make a big difference in a block. So scant 1/4 inch, if you need it, you just go all the way to 9. Now, there might be another change you want to make. The length is 1.8. It's like a piecing length. That's what that P stands for in 1/4 inch P. It's a little short. I would consider that a paper piecing length, but honestly for my regular quilts, I'm probably going to use 2.2 or even 2.4, which was the straight stitch we originally did. So let's say that I want to make these two changes. I want a scant 1/4" position at 9, and I want a different length, 2.4. For the sake of argument, go ahead and make some sort of change to your 1/4" stitch right now, and we're going to practice saving this as a preferred setting. Okay, to save this so that every single time I wake up my machine and go to this stitch, it comes up with these values, we're going to save this as a favorite stitch. Now, we have to make sure that your favorite stitch option is turned on. So we're going to go back into settings. We've got a gear or a wrench, remember, on the right side of your screen. And then again, we go to the center category, which is sewing settings. Now we're going to page through and we're going to look for something that says favorite stitch adjustment. There we go. Favorite stitch adjustment, make sure that it is on. Then hit OK. All right, once you're there, we are going to save this as a preferred setting. For my Skyline and 9480 folks, you are going to go to the More options by hitting that up arrow and finding the FS folder. For my Continental folks, you are going to go to that triangle ± More options, open it up. You'll also see FS in a folder, but you'll actually see several options. Hold off for me. My Skyline and 9480 folks, we're going to tap that folder. Now we should all see the same thing, which is put into folder. So my Continental folks, you should see an FS with a folder with an arrow going into it. We are filing that favorite stitch adjustment. We're all going to press that filing button. And your stitch should change in some way. On some machines, the background color of the value changes to yellow. On some machines, it goes bracketed like we see here on mine. So we've got brackets. And that's just there to remind me that this is a preferred setting. It's not the machine's default setting. I can still go back to default by hitting DFT. There I'm back to 8.3 and 1.8. But the next time I select this stitch, if I go back to my regular straight stitch and then back to this 1/4", I'm at my favorite stitch adjustment. That's always going to be the setting it pulls up first. And you can do that to any stitch in the machine. You do not have to just do it on this stitch. Now, if you're cursing me and saying, "God, Grace made me mess up my preferred stitch," we're going to go ahead and practice throwing this away. We are going to open up our More settings, our More options, and we're going to go back to the favorite stitch options. And you're going to look for a trash can. If you have a Continental, it will ask you, what do you want to save and what do you want to throw away? You have two options. Both times, you're going to tap either FS1 or FS2 for both saving and throwing away. On the 9480 and the Skylines, we just get the one preset, so it removes the favorite. You'll say, well, it's still at 9 and 2.4. Those are still altered from default. That's true, but I no longer see brackets. So the next time I go to default, the next time I go away and come back, it's going to be reset back to 8.3 and 1.8. Okay. Now, for those of you who say, oh my God, when I wake up in the morning, I just want to sit down at my machine and start sewing. I do not want to have to change stitches. I do not want to have to change the position of my stitch. I have some options for you. You could go back to your regular straight stitch. This is category 1, utility stitch 1, and change your needle position to 9. Same thing, puts your needle in the right hand position. Or you can get an alternate foot. They do make the clear 1/4" seam foot. And this one is meant to be used with a centered needle position for those of you who absolutely do not want to move your needle over. However, I like how the O foot works. I do not mind moving my needle over. All right, so cycling back around to where we started this whole thing, we were talking about why you would want to move your needle position. And there's your answer. The big answer would be for the 1/4" to get a scant 1/4". However, there will be occasions when you're doing a zipper, for instance, that you are going to need to move your needle over. Okay, so we've talked about this first straight stitch. We're going to come back and talk about some of the other straight stitch variants, but first let's do a basic zigzag stitch. I want you to swap back to your A foot, Take that 1/4 inch foot off, a foot back on, and we're going to go to your basic zigzag. This is going to vary by your machine. It might be stitch 8, it might be stitch 9, but it is the zigzag that has an M next to it. And of course, you're probably asking, what's the M stand for? Well, what if I told you that it either says L, M, or R next to it? Does that help? It's left, middle, or right. We are getting the zigzag that is middle aligned, it is centered. All right, and before we mess with it, let's just do a little bit of sewing. Sew a couple inches of zigzag. All right, and check your work. Hopefully you see a moderate zigzag, not too long, not too wide. Let's find extreme zigzag. We've got a length value of 1.5, and we're going to increase that all the way. That goes to 5. And then you've got a width icon. Now the width icon has changed. It's either a zigzag getting wider, or it's this sort of wide bar graph tapering to narrow bar graph. That's going to be your width value. It's currently at 3. How wide does it go? All right, it should go out to 7 millimeters. We are at maximum zigzag, and our illustration reflects that. Sew a couple inches of maximum zigzag. Okay. You should see basically a basting zigzag. It's huge. Now, it's fun. It's cool to see the extremes of the machine, but honestly, this isn't a super useful zigzag. It's a little bit insecure. So when you want to do a long, wide zigzag, I would suggest the 3-step zigzag. On this machine, this is number 11. On your machine, it might be 1 or 2 numbers off of that, but we're looking for a zigzag that is broken up into 3 dashed lines per zig and per zag. And we'll make it wider. So the width is 5. We're going to go out to 7. But we'll actually keep the length where it is. So I've got a width of 7 and a length of 1. Sew a couple inches of this 3-step zigzag, and we'll see together if we can tell what's different about it. Okay, did you spot what's different? Hopefully you're shouting at your screen right now something like, it takes multiple steps between the zig and the zag. And that's absolutely right. It is a more secure zigzag. It's straight stitches between. I really like this as a zigzag variant. It's a more secure version. Okay, let's go back to that basic zigzag. So the basic zigzag that says M next to it. And we'll talk about another variant. I want you to look at your length, which is currently 1.5. We're going to make that 0.40. 0.40. And then we'll stitch about 1 inch, and we'll see what that looks like. Okay, hopefully you came up with something like this, which is called a satin stitch. We're filling in, covering up the fabric so that we just see the color of the thread. This is both decorative and functional. It kind of looks like a buttonhole. Used to be how you do a buttonhole, but it's mostly decorative these days. Might have a nice, pretty, shiny thread or a variegated thread, and you create some sort of stripe. The reason I want to point this out to you is there's a whole section called satin stitching, and we'll get to that section in the decorative category of this video. But it is missing the basic satin stitch. So I get asked, where's my basic satin stitch? Well, they don't pre-program it and put it into the satin section because it's just a regular zigzag with a really short stitch length. So there you have it. Okay, those are my 2 big zigzag variants I want to go over. We're going to go back to a straight stitch and start talking about some straight stitch options. Okay, so let's talk about a real scenario for straight stitching. You're going to do some piecing, and when you piece, we usually lock stitch at the top and bottom of your piecing. Heck, if you're doing a garment, it's even more important. You're going to lock stitch top and bottom. The way that you usually lock stitch is you sew in reverse. So let's check out that reverse sewing. you should have a button that looks like a U-turn, and depending on your machine, it might be up here, it might be lower down here, but it's still a U-turn. Go ahead and show me that you can sew in reverse by sewing forwards and backwards a couple of times. And then if you went on a journey of discovery, we'll talk a little bit about what you might have discovered. Okay, so hopefully what you've discovered in your experimenting is that you must be pushing and holding the U-turn or the reverse button in order to sew backwards. And as soon as you let go, the machine starts sewing forwards again. Also, you might have noticed that pushing it while you're stopped doesn't do anything. This might be different than the machine you're coming from. There are different philosophies about reverse out there, but you should know Janome just sews in reverse when you are running the machine and pushing that button at the same time. Okay. Now, you can do a manual lock stitch with the reverse. You can sew a lock stitch at the top, you can sew to the bottom, and then sew backwards and forwards. However, I want to show you a cool preset that Janome has for you. We're going to go to stitch number 2. And according to the illustration, it is promising to sew a lock stitch at the beginning and a lock stitch at the end of that stitch. Let's see if it does. I'm going to cut my threads. I go up to the top of the fabric, just like I'm pretending to piece, and I'm going to let it sew. And voila. Magically, it's sewed in forward and reverse for me. There's my lock stitch. Now, as I do my piecing, I'm going to sew all the way to the bottom, and at the bottom, I'm going to want another lock stitch. What I'll have you do is sew all the way to the bottom and then pause and wait for further instructions. Okay, so like me, you should be just about at the end of your fabric where you're going to want a lock stitch. No matter how long we wait here, the machine is not going to auto lock. You do not want it to guess when to lock just based on when you stop, because you could have stopped to sneeze. We have to physically trigger the machine to do that ending lock stitch, and there is actually a clue on your screen. Do you see a clue at the bottom of your stitch illustration? There is a little reverse icon. That is telling you that the trigger is going to be the reverse button. So I push and release the reverse button, and now when I give the machine some gas on the foot pedal, I sew backwards and I sew forwards, and it forces itself to a stop. I can keep pushing on the foot pedal and it still stops. Let's do that again. I start at the top of my fabric. It auto locks. When I get to the bottom, I need to trigger the ending lock stitch by pushing the reverse button, and it forces itself to a stop. You'll notice that that time I didn't even stop sewing. I could just push the reverse button while the machine was running. Same thing happens. Okay. That is one of your auto lock options, and I really, really like that one. Before we go on to the next one, we're going to turn on an optional setting. Basically, when we've been lock stitching, we've been pushing reverse, it lock stitches, I wait for it to finish, and then I hit cut. We can combine those two, so where the machine knows if she pushes the reverse button and I lock stitch, she probably wants me to cut as well. We're going to go back into settings. Again, that's a gear or a wrench on the right side. Sewing settings, center category. And then my very first option is thread cut after auto lock. Turn that on and hit OK. All right, now we're going to go to stitch 3. Stitch 3 is the exact same as stitch 2 in how it is operated. You still push reverse to trigger an ending lock stitch, but the lock stitch is different. Try it for me and see if you can tell me what's different about it. We start at the beginning. We sew to the bottom. We still push the reverse button. And two different things happened. Number one, my thread was cut for me. That's because we turned on that cut function in the settings. Second, the stitch itself was different. This is an in-place lock stitch. You can hardly see it at the beginning, and at the end, we get a little knot that you can feel more than see. This is a much less visible knot, but it's easier to accidentally trim off when you're trimming down your block. So there's a place for each of these lock stitches. Now, let's take a quick break. And because we just talked about turning over your fabric to look at the lock stitch, I want to mention what's going on at the start of all of these seams. You'll notice that you get a little tangle at the start of every seam. This is a symptom of using the thread cutter. It is not a Janome specific problem. It is sewing machine wide. Every brand does this to a certain extent. This is your bobbin thread. After you use that thread cutter button, the bobbin thread is cut a little bit longer than is needed for forming the next stitch. When the next stitch forms, there's about 1 centimeter of tail that's not put into a stitch. So it has nothing better to do but to tangle on the back side. The good news is you can usually very easily free that up and get rid of that tangle. It's not compromising the integrity of the seam, but it doesn't look great. So on projects where you're going to look at the back, so quilting, free motion, top stitching, where someone's going to flip something over and look at the back, you probably don't want to use the thread cutter. You want to pull your threads out and cut them as normal, manually with a pair of scissors. That way you avoid that tangle. The good news is when you're piecing, nobody's going to see the back of your piecing. And so you can use your thread cutter to your heart's content and nobody's going to see that little tangle back there. Just be aware, it's not your machine malfunctioning. All Janomes do this. We are going to talk about one more lock stitch. To talk about this one, we're going to go back to stitch number 1, which is our basic straight stitch, no lock stitch at the beginning and end. And when you're in this situation, and you just need a lock stitch every now and then, you can do what I call an on-demand lock stitch. And this is just triggered by pushing the bullseye button up by your other buttons. It's a knot picture, but it looks like a bullseye. And so for example, I would be sewing along. I need a lock stitch. I push the bullseye button. It begins blinking. Keep sewing. Sews 4 stitches in place, and then because we have that thread cut after auto lock turned on, it also cut my threads for me. You'll notice that that is the in-place lock stitch, just like we saw with number 3. But that one only happens when I trigger it. I don't like to trigger it at the beginning because right now it's going to cut my threads because of that setting. If I want a beginning lock stitch, I will push number 3. All right. So let's take a quick check-in on the buttons that we've used so far. We just got done talking about the lock stitch button. You'll notice it has a light on. That means it's available versus blinking, which means it's in progress. The reverse button we've seen has 2 distinct uses. Number 1, when we're on a basic straight stitch or a basic zigzag stitch, it just sews in reverse as long as we push the button. If we are on our special lock stitches, which are stitches 2 and 3, it will trigger whatever lock stitch is part of that stitch. We've also very briefly at the very beginning pressed the needle up down button, so that again just moves your needle to the alternate position, down or up. It does not control where the needle stops. We did that in the settings. Presser foot up down just moves your presser foot to the opposite position. If it's up, it moves it down. If it's down, it moves it up. And cut, hopefully you've been using, but I haven't specifically talked about so far. When I push it, it cuts the thread, makes a bunch of noises, and you wait until it's all done with its noises before you go to remove your fabric. Again, the light being on means it's available, and blinking means it's currently in progress. The cut function does not work if you are running the machine. All right, we also talked about our speed slider at the very beginning. That controls what happens if you floor the foot pedal, how fast can you go. We'll come back to that. We're going to talk about the last button we haven't talked about, which is the start-stop button. The start-stop button is an alternate to using your foot control. So for this demo, you're going to need to unplug your foot control cord. All right, so the start-stop button does exactly what it says on the tin. Push to start, push to stop. You do not need to hold it. It will run at whatever speed your speed slider is set at. So for safety, let's start with your slider all the way to the left. I push to start, starts running. I'm not pushing on my foot control. It's just running the machine. I can speed up using the slider, slow down, And then when I want to stop, I push to stop. Super duper easy. Pause me and take like 1 minute to play with that a couple of times, get a feel for that. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to play with that. You can go ahead and plug your foot control back in unless you've fallen in love with the start-stop button and you want to keep using it for the rest of class. A common follow-up question is, why would I use the start-stop button? There's a couple reasons. Maybe you can name a couple for me right now. You might have said, what if I have a really long piece of fabric to sew and it's going to, just go straight ahead for a really long time. Maybe I'll find that easier with the start-stop button. That's a great answer. Buttonholes are really easy to do with the start-stop button. But primarily, this is an accessibility feature. If you have poor feeling in your feet and it's hard to tell how hard you're pushing on the foot control, this would be a great option for you. If you break your ankle, get your knee replaced, get your hip replaced, you can keep sewing during your convalescence using the start-stop button. As we'll see in my free motion demo, that's also a really good time to use this button. So it's there when you need it, and you don't have to use it if you don't want to. To finish up our utility section, we're going to talk about presser foot pressure and thread tension. We'll start with presser foot pressure. That is controlled as one of your more options. And remember, that's either an up arrow, or if you have a Continental, it's that triangle with a plus minus. And once you open up your more options, finally, we see the more options I've been talking about. We've got thread tension, which is 2 interlocking threads, and presser foot pressure, which is a foot with an arrow pointing down. And your number probably says 6 or it says auto. Either way, it is providing a moderate amount of squishing of the foot onto your fabric. It's pretty high by default. It's moderate to high because quilting cotton can take a lot of pushing and it's good for it. It keeps it moving along. However, if you have a squishy or stretchy fabric, you will find that the foot steps too hard and it squishes or it stretches your fabric too much. Usually you'll see this as you've pinned the edges even, and by the time you're done pinning, the top layer has been scooched longer than the bottom layer. Or you'll be sewing along and you'll get this ripple that travels ahead of the foot and it won't go under the foot. In both of those occasions, you're going to want to lighten up your presser foot pressure, which means decrease that number. So this one goes to 1. Depending on your machine, you might go from auto to like -5. They've changed their numbering system over the years, but honestly, the numbers are arbitrarily different. You're still experiencing the same thing. Your presser foot pressure is lightening up so that you can snowshoe over the top of those thick or squishy layers. Okay. Now, if you have a 9480 or an M8, you have an additional degree of control. If you do not have one of those machines, you can ignore this next part. So for those two machines, you have what's called floating mode, and that is another option here at the top of the screen, up where we had our pivot feature and our twin needle, etc. And it shows a little foot on a layer of fabric. You push that, and it changes the icon inside of the more options. Now, instead of having an arrow pointing at a foot, we've got a foot with an arrow up and down. This is how you move the foot up and down. We literally can go from 0 millimeters above the fabric to 4 millimeters. It will sew with the foot at 4 millimeters above the bed of the machine. Why would you do this? Well, obviously I wouldn't do that right now because then my fabric wouldn't go anywhere. It's not in contact. But with very thick things like 2 layers of faux fur, you might find that lightening up your presser for pressure is still too low. The foot's still shoveling the fabric. And so you need to physically raise the foot rather than just lighten up the presser foot pressure. So that is available for people with the 9480 and the M8. We'll go ahead and turn that off. Okay, so we'll all come back together. That was presser foot pressure. Now we will talk about the big one, which is thread tension. That was the other icon in the more options. It's 2 threads interlocking. And right now mine says 3.4. Yours is probably really close to that, or it says auto. So what this controls and what this is indicating is the pressure level of your tension discs. And your tension discs sit right here on your thread path, right-hand side. and they are supposed to put resistance on your top thread. This controls your top thread only. The reason we only worry about the top thread is it is dominant in the relationship with the bobbin thread, and so it should be able to control the bobbin thread just by us increasing or decreasing the resistance on the top thread. So with the number at 3.4, we are putting a moderate amount of resistance or squish. The discs are literally squishing the thread right now. As we lower the number, those discs spread apart and then the top thread gets looser. The way I remember it is lower is looser, LL. If we take this number higher, that means we squish the discs harder together, there's more resistance on the top thread, and that top thread gets tighter. I think of it as a rhyme, higher, tighter. So lower is looser and higher is tighter. Okay. With that said, we're going to do a little activity and experience kind of what that would look like when you have different tensions. As is, with it as is right now, you hopefully have really nice tension, and I certainly do. I can look at the top and the bottom of my straight stitching, and the stitching looks essentially identical. This is really easy for the machine to do right now because we have the same thread on the top as on the bottom, and we have 2 layers of quilting cotton. That could not be easier for the machine. This is exactly what the machine was optimized for. So right now our machine is doing its job with the tensioning because we've given it the easiest scenario. There's lots of reasons that you might have some issues with your tension, and a lot of it has to do with your creative choices that are changing away from this scenario that we have right here. Most commonly, you have a different color of thread in the top and the bobbin that actually affects your tension because of the amount of dye in the relative threads. You might have different brands, top and bottom. That happens to me all the time. I have an unknown white bobbin and I'm using it, and then I have a new white spool that's maybe from a different brand. Threads come in different thicknesses. Manufacturers make them different thicknesses. Maybe you're doing metallic on top and polyester on the bottom. So lots of reasons. It can be fabric related. You can have a thicker fabric or a thinner fabric. When that happens, I don't want you to be mad at your machine. Your machine doesn't know what you're doing and it can't adjust to it. So it's up to us, and that's why they give us this tension adjustment. To get more comfortable with adjusting tension, we are going to intentionally mess with it and look at what that looks like and how to correct it. For my part, I am also going to use an off-color bobbin so that you can really see the difference in what we're doing. I'm going to put the blue bobbin in, and we'll keep the white thread on top, and then we'll really be able, oh goodness, we'll really be able to tell what's going on. All right, so with this offset, I am going to still force it to have a more dramatic response by lowering my tension to 0. And remember, lower is looser. We are spreading the tension discs further apart, and so they are not going to tighten the top thread quite as much. What happens with that is the top thread is looped around the bobbin thread. That's a stitch formation. You have this series of loopings, partings, loopings, partings. And once the threads are looped, that top thread tightness is going to pull on that bobbin thread and determine where it goes. So in a good stitch, it's pulling it to a middle position. We've just lowered our tension all the way. So that looping point is going to form, but then the top thread is just going to kind of droop downward. So for this tension scenario, we're going to put an alternate color in top. So I've got blue on the top and white in the bobbin so we can really see the difference. So we're going to sew a line of straight stitching. And remember, our tension is at 0. You can see here that the blue on top looks okay, but on the back, and I realize this is a subtle difference, but I really don't see distinct white stitches. This bobbin thread is really just laying on top of the fabric, and there's actually little nubbins of blue that I can feel. I can even usually pull that bobbin thread all the way out. There we go. And what you're left with are little nubbins of blue thread. You might be able to see that on yours as well. And that is showing us that that looping point is too low in the fabric. It's visible on the back side. So the way I think of it is the looping point is too low, and so your tension must be too low. Now, of course, you're not going to be doing 0.0 with your tension in real life, but you might make a creative change with your thread, and you've kept your tension where it is, and you still get that result. So tension too low, number's too low, or excuse me, the looping point's too low, so the number's too low. We need to increase that number. Okay. To show you the opposite, we have to sort of trick the machine. It's really hard to get a machine to show tension too tight. So to do this, we have to go to a zigzag stitch. We're going to make it as wide as possible, so all the way out to 7. Then we'll go in and change our tension as high as possible. So the higher the number goes, the tighter the top thread gets. The tighter the top thread gets, the harder it's going to pull on that bobbin thread. And so now it's going to pull that bobbin thread all the way to the top. The last thing that I'm doing is I have some stabilizer in my fabric to help it resist the crunching power of this enormously tight tension. Let's see what happens. There we go. So you can see here that there is white bobbin thread coming to the top. Blue is my top thread, white's my bobbin thread. The back looks fine, has no problem. But there's a lot of bobbin thread coming to the top because that top thread is yanking that bobbin thread up. This is less likely for you to see, but that is what the opposite would look like. Again, the looping point is too high, so the tension number is too high. Okay, here is my takeaway for you. That's the theory of tension as I explain it. If it didn't make sense to you in those words, your manual has a diagram, and there are lots of other resources out there of people explaining tension in different ways. The good news is, even if you don't understand the theory of tension, you can still guess and check your way to the right answer. If you get a bad stitch where it's unbalanced on one side or the other, it doesn't look identical on both sides, first, you're going to rethread your top thread and your bobbin thread. That's a really important part of troubleshooting. A lot of people think they know which thread is at fault, and so they just rethread that thread. But it is a relationship, and so I really encourage you to rethread both top and bottom whenever you have an issue. If the issue persists, then you're going to start messing with tension. You can just change one way or the other. If it's at 3.4, go to 2.4. Did it make it better? Nope, it made it worse. Okay, you went the wrong way. Let's go the other way. Go to 4.4. Oh, it's a little better. Okay, we'll go a little bit further, 5.4. You can guess and check your way to the right answer. And I know a lot of us were told, don't touch the tension. Once you mess with the tension, it never goes back where it was. And that is just not true with these new machines where we can either hit DFT or reselect the stitch or turn the machine off and on again as the nuclear option if we really get flustered. It's so easy to reset your tension. Please feel like you can mess with it because you will expand your creative abilities when you feel comfortable changing your tension. Okay, so that's the end of our utility section. This is a great time to pause me and take a little stretch break, bathroom break, brain break. I'll see you back in a little bit. And what you'll need to get for me is a new piece of fabric with stabilizer and your F foot. That is a clear foot. Let me show you what that looks like. I want you to come back with your F foot that looks like that. I'll see you in a few. All right, so as promised, we're on to our decorative section. I hope you had a good break. We're going to be swapping out for that F foot. The way I remember that the F foot is for decorative stitching is it's F for fancy stitch. And of course, if you forget that, your recommended foot will change as soon as we go to a decorative stitch. I'll show you that. So the stitch in particular that we're going to go to is the satin section. So we need to go to our decorative scrolls. That's where all our categories are hidden. And look for the satin section. You'll have to read through those words. You might have to turn a page depending on your machine. And then we are going to pick a leaf. So I've got two. I've got a mini leaf and a bigger leaf. Oh, what the heck? I'll do the bigger leaf. So that's stitch number 4 for me. You find some sort of leaf or football shape. And sure enough, it's recommending the F foot. Now, the reason it wants the F foot has to do with the back of the foot. The A foot is perfectly smooth on the back. The F foot has a raised area on the back, and that's to accommodate the dense stitching that we're about to do. So put that foot on. Remember that I lower the foot electronically, then raise it manually so that I can then lower it manually, gently onto that foot. Okay. Here is your challenge. I want you to sew exactly 2 football shapes or 2 leaves and stop when you get to the end of the second leaf. There's 1. And there's 2. Let's see how I did. Okay, I did okay. You can see I just barely had started the next leaf. Oops. What I hope you get out of this activity is that it's hard and stressful to finish right at the end of that leaf. It's hard to see where exactly the leaves begin and end. The good news is there's an easy way to do this. What we'll do instead is when we're ready for the second leaf to finish, we are going to press the bullseye button, which is the lock stitch button. We pushed this earlier with the straight stitch button and it just instantly lock stitched. Now that we're on a decorative stitch, it is a polite button and it waits for us, or excuse me, it waits for the machine to finish the decorative stitch before it lock stitches. So we use it as a way to signal the machine, hey, I want you to stop when you get to the end of this stitch. So again, if I want to sew 2 leaves, there's the first one. So now I'm in the middle of the second leaf. And no matter what, running the machine or stopped, I push the bullseye button and then I keep sewing. And when it's done with that leaf, it forces itself to a stop. And because we have that setting on, the thread cut after auto lock, it cut for me. And this is a really nice, precise way to finish that leaf. I want you to try that at least one more time so that you can lock that in your brain. Sew through 1 leaf. In the middle of the second leaf, anywhere, I push that bullseye button and it waits until I'm at the end of the leaf and then it stops me. Okay. Now that we've learned how to come to a clean finish at the end of a decorative stitch, let's go ahead and refine this leaf. So this is a satin stitch, and satin stitches are meant to really obscure the fabric with the color of the thread. And right now I can see some green fabric poking through. So let's adjust that. We've got a stitch length of 0.4. I'm going to change that to 0.30. And then let's sew a couple more leaves and see if we like the density. We want to get it as dense as possible without stopping and tying a knot. When you get too dense, it just can't move forward. So you don't want to get so dense that the machine cannot advance. So as I go, I'm going to see how short I can make this stitch and still have it stitch. There we go. I'm right at my limit there. Okay. So I was at 0.20. And you can see my decreasing length, and they're getting a little distorted here as the foot has trouble advancing. But I'm getting to the density that I want. But as I do so, it's getting squished. It's no longer a leaf shape. It's more of a ball shape. In order to have a good leaf shape, I do have an adjustment that I can do to this. And this is going to be another one of our more options. So I'm going to push the up arrow, or for my M7, M8, M6 people, you're going to push that triangle with a plus and a minus. And we have a new icon here on screen. It shows a satin stitch and it says ×1. If we increase this, we are stretching the length of the stitch. This is called elongation. So I'll go out to, times 3, let's say. So it should be 3 times as long. Oh. And looks like I'm in the middle of a cut. This is actually a great learning experience. So my cutter is blinking, which means I let the foot pedal off the foot pedal too early, and it still has a little bit of action left to go on a cut sequence. Oh, close that. Nope, it's angry. Okay, so what we can do in this case is use the back button. All right, take it back. Back button's not available. Let's see. There we go. Okay, just rotated the needle down and up, and it said I finished my sequence. So if you ever interrupt that sequence, it will let you know I'm still in the middle of a sequence. And in that case, I just moved my needle down and up, and it said, okay, I finished my sequence. Okay, so we've got our elongated leaf. And what we're going to see is that the density is the same, but the leaf is longer overall. This time I'll keep pushing on the foot pedal until all those noises are done. Okay, so now we have a leaf that's 3 times as long, but equally as dense. Again, this is called elongation if you want to look it up later, and it is only available in the satin stitch section. All right, so that's one thing that you can do with your decorative stitches. If you want to pause me and explore more of your satin stitches, this is a good time for that. I am going to go ahead and go on to something else. The next thing we're going to do is find the car stitch. And this will be in different sections depending on your machine. They've moved it to different places over time. Sometimes it's in something called pictograph. On these newest machines, it's called lifestyle. But what I want you to find is this little car here, and everybody should have that somewhere. So take a second and figure out where that is. You might have to look at the lid and see which category it's listed under. Now that everybody has their car pulled up, I want you to notice that it is driving upwards and its wheels are to the left. Now let's say that I wanted to put that on my sleeve. My sleeve is going to go onto the machine this way so that I can slip it onto the free arm. And so the edge of the sleeve will be over to the right. And let's say I wanted the wheels of the car to be driving along the edge of the sleeve. Well, then I need this car design to flip over the vertical axis. I have an option to do that at the top of the screen, or on the Continentals, it's probably somewhere over by your stitch illustration, but you'll have the same icon. It's a half moon being flipped over the vertical axis. And when I tap that, notice your car flips. So now the car is driving upwards with its wheels to the right. That would be great for that sleeve example. Now, assume that I wanted to, for some reason, have the car drive downwards, wheels to the right. Do you see a different icon that will allow you to do that? If you pointed out this other half moon, you're exactly right. I tap that, and now the wheels are to the right, but the car is driving downward. Now it's your turn. Can you make the car drive downward, wheels to the left? Drive downward, wheels to the left. Hopefully you pushed this half moon that is being flipped over the vertical axis to flip the car back over, wheels to the left, still driving downward. And finally, can you make it flip so that it is wheels to the left, driving upwards, which is where we started. Wheels to the left, driving upwards. And what you have to do there is flip it back over the horizontal axis. So we've made the car face 4 different directions. That's because there's 2 buttons and there's 4 ways to push 2 different buttons. I can push one, I can push the other, I can push both, and I can push neither. That makes this car face 4 ways. Here's a follow-up question for you. Why did I do this particular activity on the car. Why didn't I do it on the football or leaf shape that we were just on? Hopefully you said something like, because the car is asymmetric, or it doesn't look the same on both sides. This car is asymmetric in both axes. It doesn't look the same either left, right, or up, down. And that gives us the most degree of change available to us. With that football or leaf shape, you can tell if I flipped it vertically or horizontally, it wouldn't have looked any different. And so I actually wouldn't have had both of these options available. Sometimes it'll give you one option, but honestly, pushing it doesn't do anything. You can imagine a snowflake would be another example of a stitch where reflecting it or mirroring it in this way would not change anything. So we had to go to an asymmetric design in order to check this out. Again, if you want to pause me and look through other fun stitches, please go for it. I really recommend that you make a stitch book of all your decorative stitches and just stitch out a little bit at each one. But for this class, we're just going to be playing with a few of them. So if you are happy with the amount of decorative stitching you've done, we're going to go on to another ability with decorative stitching, which is called sequencing. Sequencing is where you put different stitches next to each other. So instead of having car, car, car forever, maybe I could do car, bike, heart, or something like that. To swap to sequencing, we are going to go to the top bar of options, top row, and do you see an icon that shows heart, heart, heart? It's either light blue or yellow usually. And behind it, in a lighter color, there is heart, spade, diamond. We're currently in like single stitch mode where it's just the same stitch repeated over and over. But when I tap this icon, the heart, spade, diamond becomes more prominent, and that shows me that I'm able to chain different stitches together. So for instance, let's do this bicycle, and then I'm going to switch categories to animals, and there's a cat, and go to decorative, page over a little bit, and do some sort of scroll. Find 3 stitches, let's say, 3 or 4 that you like. It doesn't have to be a super intense search. We're just grabbing something so we can do a quick demo. Pause me and find some stitches and add 3 or 4 into your stitch sequence. At this point, you should have a couple of stitches in a sequence. Okay. And the first thing I want us to do is just see what happens if we press on the foot pedal and just let her run. We're going to fill as if we're doing a border from top to bottom of your stitching. Now, as I get close to the bottom of the fabric, and I can tell that this is the last design that's going to fit, this bicycle is the last thing that'll fit, I can push the bullseye button, and again, I'm just telling the machine, stop when you finish this design. And there you have it. You can see that it repeated the designs over and over, and then I triggered it when to stop. Now here's a question. What if I just wanted 1 bicycle, 1 cat, and 1 scroll? How could I do that? There's a couple things you could do. Number 1, you could just watch, and when the scroll is being stitched, you could push the bullseye button and tell it to finish at the end of the stitch. But again, that's kind of stressful. What if you didn't see properly when it was on the scroll? And so there is a way to tell the machine to just do 1. The way we do that is we program in a lock stitch at the very end of the sequence. Do you notice how a stitch is blue right now? Depending on which stitch was the last stitch, one of them is highlighted in blue. I'm going to use the arrow keys to move the blue all the way down to the opening, and the cursor is now in the blank opening at the very end of the sequence. And I'm going to add a lock stitch. And in fact, on every single page, the last option is going to be a bullseye with a little LS. And I program that in. It's not actually going to stitch a bullseye, it's just going to stitch a lock stitch at the end of my last stitch. This is also a good time to say, practice deleting and replacing a design. So let's say that I'm not in love with the scrolls that I have there. I'm going to move my cursor up to the scroll so that they're highlighted in blue, and then I find the trash can that's somewhere on my screen. Happens to be up top right now, could also be maybe off by your stitch illustration depending on your machine. Okay, and then you'll see that the design got deleted and my bullseye is highlighted in blue now. When I add a design, a replacement to it, it'll insert it before the bullseye. So let's see, I'll find something else that I like. I like animals. Let's see what else. I've got a little cute little owl. Let's do that. Okay, so I've got my 3 designs and a bullseye or lock stitch programmed at the end. So let's stitch now, and if all goes according to plan, it should finish and I don't have to prompt it to do any stop. It stops by itself. All right, there you have it. I did not have to push the bullseye button, and I went ahead and got just one iteration there. All right, how about another scenario? Let's say that I started stitching, but my needle was actually secretly unthreaded. And it took the machine a couple of stitches to realize that it wasn't threaded, and it says rethread and start. But if I restart right now, the machine has still taken a couple steps into the bicycle. And so it's going to start halfway through the bicycle. Get rethreaded here. I don't want to start halfway through the bicycle. I need to start over at the beginning. And there is a stitch restart icon at the very top of my stitch illustration, little back button. Push that and we're all the way back to the beginning of the bicycle. All right, so that's sequencing for you when you just have decorative stitches. Now we're going to go to another type of sequencing, which is writing letters, writing, a quilt dedication, for instance. So first thing I'm going to do is throw away all of the designs that I have currently until I'm back to a blank slate. You'll do that too. And then we're going to go to the lettering tab. It might say A, it might say ABC on it. You'll have your choice of fonts. I don't particularly care what you pick. Just be aware that Cyrillic is the Russian alphabet, so you may not want that. I'm going to go for a simple, oh no, let's do Broadway. Absolutely. Okay. So when we get into lettering, we get a different set of options up top here. You can see a small and large option, as well as a capital and lowercase option. I would always stick to large. Small is too small, in my opinion. And then capitals and lowercases, that is useful. We'll be typing, and I want you to use capitals and lowercases. If you chose the font that says block 9mm, you will not have lowercase available to you, and that's okay. But for now, we are going to type out a message. I think I'll type Janome, capital J, tap the uppercase, lowercase to cycle over to lowercase. And I make sure I've spelled it right. If I made a little mistake, I can scroll back up using my arrow keys and then throw stuff away. And we will see how this works. Just pause and cut my thread. This would be a great time to use that start-stop button. All right, and there is my stitching. Now, I want you to notice that I didn't have to push any sort of stop. I didn't push the lock stitch. I didn't program in a lock stitch. What's cool about these Janomes is they know that if you're just doing lettering, you probably don't want to say Janome, Janome, Janome over and over again. And so it stops after one iteration without having to be programmed. Now, if I add a decorative stitch, so for instance, my cursor is currently on blue on the J, so that's as high up in the design I can go. I want to add a heart at the beginning and say heart Janome. So I'm going to go back to decorative stitching, and let's see. Where's my hearts? That is in kids. Okay, we're going to go to kids and add a heart. Perfect. Now that I've added a decorative stitch in, and it's not just lettering, it will try to repeat over and over and over again. And so I am going to go down to the bottom and add a lock stitch. All right, let's stitch this out. There we go. Yay. Okay, so take a couple minutes and create a sequence with lettering and decorative stitching that you like. And when you're done, go ahead and unpause me, because then we're going to talk about saving this as a custom sequence. Okay, so hopefully you've ended up with a sequence that you like. Even if you don't have a sequence that you like, I'll show you how to throw this away once we save it, so it's not the end of the world. So we want to save this as a custom sequence so that later I can find it again. I need to look at the top bar here, and right now I don't see the icon I want to see. Depends on your machine. We're looking for a folder with an arrow going into it. On the 9480, I have to scroll over to see that, but on most other machines, you'll immediately see a folder with an arrow going into it. Don't confuse this with the folder with an arrow coming out of it. We need to see the arrow being put into the folder. All right, so we push that, and we come to the Janome filing system. The Janome filing system has some quirks to it. The number one quirk that gets people is that right now we're in the ether. It's like we're outside of the filing cabinet. If we were to hit OK right now, we haven't actually filed our design. We've like dropped it on the ground next to the filing cabinet. And so we will not be able to find it again. You have to go inside of a folder. Now they conveniently make you a folder. It's called ORDF. It stands for Ordinary Sewing Folder. Doesn't make me feel great about my sewing that they call it ordinary, but that's how it's been for the past 15 years. I'll live with it. You can also create your own folder using this icon here and name it. Either way, you need a folder, and you need to tap the folder to go inside of it. Now that we are inside of a folder, we are actually in the filing cabinet. We will actually be able to save our design. Now it has named it for us. It's called it C, probably for custom 001. Ugh, boring. I want to name it something that tells me what that actual sequence is. And so I'm going to push the little pencil and write something that tells me what is this sequence. So I will write Janome. If you had written a really long message, like Made with Love by Grace, you might just put quilt label as your name. Doesn't matter. And then we hit OK. It's got a name, it's in a folder, it's being saved to the machine, not to the USB stick, and I hit OK. All right. So now we're going to practice retrieving this, and let's pretend that it's a whole new day. So I'm actually going to turn the machine off. You went to bed, you slept, you got up in the morning, and it's time to make a quilt label. Turn your machine back on. Okay, and every time you turn your machine on, you do go back to your regular utility stitch. To retrieve your sequence, now we go to the folder with an arrow coming out of it because we need to take it out of the filing cabinet. Again, we're back in our filing system, and we know that we saved our design inside of the ORDF folder. And sure enough, there it is. It's called Janome. I tap it, and it brings it up for me. So let's say that we sewed our design, and now we're ready to go on with our day. We've got some regular 1/4 inch piecing to do. There's a couple options for how to move on with your life. Number one, if I go to the utility section, and it will say, did you know that you're moving away from your design? It will be deleted. It's not really going to be deleted because we saved it. It's just erasing it from the sequencing area currently. If you had not saved the design, it is warning you it will not be memorized, but we've memorized it intentionally, and so we're okay. So I hit OK, and we're off to utility stitching, easy peasy. If I was in my sequence and I wanted to do decorative stitching, but I no longer wanted to do sequencing, I'm going to go back to that icon I showed you before, heart, spade, diamond. I go to heart, heart, heart. And again, it warns me, if you have not intentionally saved this, it is not being saved. And we're back to regular decorative stitching. Okay. I have one last advanced topic to talk about with decorative stitching. So we'll look at the lettering for this. And this is good spacing. I like the spacing here on the Janome. But it is possible that depending on your fabric, the stabilizer that you're using, etc., that your letters might get stacked too close together and they're kind of stepping on top of each other. If you have that going on, you have options. We can adjust a thing called balance. Balance is the relative forward-back motion of the machine. It's supposed to stitch the exact same amount forward and backward. But in the real world, it's rare that that really happens perfectly. Often it might be easier for the machine to step forward than backwards. So maybe it steps that far forward and halfway backwards. Maybe because there's seams or an incline in the fabric. And then sometimes over time, that balance just changes over time and it's not quite as tight as it used to be. In that case, you have options. So at the base of your machine, you will have either a visible metal coin looking thing, or you'll have a capped version. You can see a capped version here. If there's a capped version, you can take your screwdriver and pry the cap off and you'll expose a little metal coin just like this. And you can see it's got a groove that should be basically centered and then plus and minus on either side. This is your balance adjustment. And honestly, I never remember which way to turn it. I just guess and check. Your manual does explain which way to turn based on the results you're getting. In this case, I would guess that I need to turn toward the plus because my stitches were too close together. And so you would turn, say, 10 to 15 degrees at a time, if this is a 360-degree circle, and then do another test. And you're going to watch your stitching get further apart. Now, I wouldn't mess with this if you're not having issues right now with your lettering. There's no harm in it, but honestly, I'd rather it just stay where the factory set it if you're not having problems. If you are, well, then you might as well go for it right now. You can pause me and adjust your balance and get those letters a little bit further spread apart. And again, that is just something you're going to have to mess with depending on the fabric, the stabilizer, the stitch, etc. It varies depending on the project. And that is available to you if you need it. When you want to reset it, 12 o'clock straight up and down is the default. All right, well, congratulations on finishing the decorative stitch section of the mastery. We're going to move on to the practical section where we play with a few different feet. So what you're going to need to go get is the buttonhole foot to start, and I'll tell you the other stuff as we go. When we get ready to do a buttonhole, we're going to need to set up the foot, the machine, and the fabric. So we'll start with the machine. the buttonhole section is in different places for different machines. It is either a separate category on top, or as in the case of this machine, it is sort of secretly deeper in the pages of the utility section. So I paged over to page 3 and found my buttonholes. We'll stick to number 1 here, which is the basic one, and you can see it's recommending the foot R. Okay, so we've got the screen ready to go, and you'll notice it says pull down BH lever, pull down buttonhole lever. This is a secret lever that sits behind your needle threader that you don't know is there until we do this activity. So practice finding this secret lever that is behind your needle threader. It might be black or metal or white plastic. Okay, so that's the machine prep for you. Now we're going to get the foot ready. The foot comes with a stabilizer plate, which is an extra metal plate that is hooked into this opening here and just kind of sits behind the foot. You can go ahead and take that off. That is meant to help you sew over thick layers, uneven layers, and it's just an extra bit that we do not need to be using right now. Okay, so you've just got your naked foot. And we are going to orient it so that the letter R, which is engraved, is correct right side up, and so is this L and this S. If those are upside down, you're holding your foot upside down. So with the foot in this orientation, the back of the foot has a mouth on it, and you can actually hold on to the front, hold on to the back, pull them apart from each other, and this mouth opens up. Go ahead and practice that for me. Make sure you know how to open it. It does take some force. Okay, so we've opened up the mouth all the way, and now we're going to put a button in. Now you'll need a button. And I am going to put the button into the mouth and then close the mouth on the button, just like that. If you don't have a button handy, that's okay. You can put an invisible button in there and just close the mouth a moderate amount and you'll have an invisible button. Okay. So what we're doing here is sizing the buttonhole. We've got these bumpers here, and the further apart the bumpers are, the bigger the button, the further the bumpers get apart. The smaller the button, the closer together the bumpers are. Now, if you dropped your button like me, we'll just get our spare and pop that right back in. Okay. The bumpers are what the buttonhole lever interacts with. That's the mechanical connection between the machine so that the machine knows how big the button is. Okay, so that's the foot setup for now. We'll come back and talk about this L and S in a minute, but for now we've got our button in our foot, and we're going to put the foot on the machine. It actually goes on like any other foot, except for that you kind of got to sneak in the side, but it clips onto, oh, there we go, got to check my method, lower electronically, lift manually, and then I can lower manually onto that silver bar. And you'll see that the front bumper and the buttonhole lever are interlocked. The last thing we do is set up our buttonhole on our fabric. Like I said, we prep the machine, we prep the foot, we prep the fabric. What the fabric needs is a crosshairs marked at the bottom center of the buttonhole. We are marking the bottom center because this stitch is going to travel backwards, and I'll show you what that looks like. So we'll mark a crosshairs where I have room to travel backwards, just like that. So if this is my crosshairs, I am anticipating a buttonhole right about there. And of course, you would use a erasable pen or chalk in your real life. For now, I've used a ballpoint pen. We've marked crosshairs. At this point, our prep is done. We are going to lower the needle into the crosshairs that I have marked. And no, it's not that easy. It's a little bit of guess and check. Oh, we're close. And just like that. And I don't even worry about what that tail is doing back here. It'll take care of itself. Okay, we're ready to go. This is a great opportunity to use your start-stop button if you've been itching for another chance. And we're just going to let it run. And it forces itself to a stop at the end. And again, I have a cut function on in the settings, so it cuts for me. And there is my buttonhole exactly on top of my bullseye. Now, let's talk about adapting or adjusting this buttonhole. You always do a test buttonhole. You never go right for the wedding dress. Why? Because different buttons need different accommodations. And it is possible that this buttonhole is too small or too large for my particular button. And so you would cut this open. I usually use a seam ripper and then try to tuck the button through, make sure it goes through easily, but not too easily. If we determined that the button was so thick that this normal sized buttonhole was just not accommodating it and I really had to force it, we would need a larger buttonhole. There is an adjustment for this. If you look at your foot again, you've got that L and that S. So if I need a larger than normal buttonhole, I can turn this screw here and I'm watching the line as it moves toward the L. See that? Moved up toward the L. That is a larger buttonhole. I've physically moved the bumper backward. If I need a smaller buttonhole for a very thin button, I can move that line toward the S, and that's scooching the bumper forward. For now, I'm just going to leave it in the middle. That's one adjustment you can make. So a micro adjustment to the size of the buttonhole for a relatively large or relatively small, or excuse me, thin button. You can also adjust the width and density of the buttonhole, just like we have with any other stitch. So if I want a wider, bulkier buttonhole, maybe for a jacket, I can go to this 5.0 and there's a blue highlight around the outside of the buttonhole to try to show me what's part of the buttonhole I'm adjusting. I'm going to put that out as wide as it can go, which is 9. I've also got density, and this is in the More Options menu. And I've got 0.45 next to my length icon. Let's go down to 0.35. We won't go crazy. Finally, we've got this 0.8, and this is a really cool adjustment. This is how big the slit is in the center. I find it really hard to cut this open without cutting any threads with the 0.8 millimeter width. So I'll put this out usually to something like 1.2. And I'll show you how this looks quite a bit different than it did. So it's going to be the same overall size of the buttonhole, but it is wider, the stitching is denser, and the opening is wider as well. Okay, and there you can see that denser, wider buttonhole with a wider opening in the center. So hopefully you've seen that the buttonhole foot is not too scary. It's just a series of steps. And now you're prepared to go out and do some buttonholes on some garments. All right, for this next activity, you're going to need your AccuFeed foot, which looks like this. And your screwdriver. Now, if you got a 9410 or an M6, you do not have an AccuFeed foot with your machine, but you can definitely go out and buy one. This is the walking foot. They give it a fancy Janome branded name, but it's a walking foot. And this is called the twin AccuFeed foot. Okay, so once you've got those two things out, we are going to put the AccuFeed foot on. This is our first full shank foot, which means that it has its own screw adapter point. We do not need this clip-on shank anymore. So we will use our screwdriver, loosen that screw almost all the way, and slip the shank off out the back. Put that somewhere that you can find it again in a couple minutes. And while I'm here, I'm actually going to back that shank out back the screw out almost all the way. Not quite falling out, but almost. When we put the AccuFeed foot on, we're going to slip this opening over the screw. Now we also have a hook in back. You don't have to worry about that just yet. So first we just focus on getting that opening over from back to front and push forward. And I push quite firmly. This is sort of a springy foot. And so I push forward. The front of that clip point has to come all the way around the front of this shaft. So I push firmly, tighten down with my hand, and then when I get it basically finger tight, I will come in with the screwdriver and give it an extra quarter turn or so. Really important to tighten with the screwdriver on this particular foot because it squishes it harder against the shank, and if you have not gotten it properly seated there, this will hopefully pop it all the way forward, all the way in. With any shank, and I will repeat this, anything on a Janome, you must tighten with the screwdriver on this screw. It just doesn't get finger tight, it's not tight enough, and it will loosen and pop off on you, so you always want to do an extra tighten there. Okay, now for that hook I mentioned. In the back of that hook, it should be lined up on a bar. And if you actually want to get up and go look at the back of your machine, you should be able to see a little crossbar that sits, it's about, a quarter inch big, and it sits crossways. And it's right behind where this hook is. And we're going to push the hook forward until it is flush with the sort of bracket system back there. This is an independent motor that's going to move the little walking teeth up and down. So make sure that's pushed there flush. One thing that tells me that I've done this properly is the little feet that are nested inside the big foot are sort of flush with the rest of the foot. They're not poking straight up. If they're poking straight up, that hook is not properly seated there. Okay, so that was step one. We got the foot on there. Now we're going to go back to a straight stitch. On a straight stitch, and we need to tell the machine that we have put the AccuFeed foot on so it will actually engage that motor. And you can see that here as these teeth, these are the teeth of the walking foot walking on top of 2 layers of fabric. And that's exactly what this foot is meant for. It's for thick or difficult to feed fabrics. For instance, I have a little quilt sandwich here, and it's going to help the top layer feed evenly with the bottom layer, because as you get thicker things, the top layer becomes disconnected from the bottom layer and it's way further away from the feed dogs, and so it doesn't feed as well. So we push this and it says make sure the proper foot holder is attached. This does not mean you did something wrong. It always gives you this message. It just says, hey, you selected something for a specialty foot. Make sure that specialty foot is on there. All right, and it restricts me to straight stitching. Okay. So there's no big trick beyond this. I just want you to sew a little bit and you should see the little feet walk along. I think walking feet are kind of cute. And I'll trim my extra tail. And then I'll sew kind of slow so you can see on my foot here, the little feet walking along. It's like feed dogs mounted on top. And that is literally all there is to it. It's helping to feed the top layer. Now, this is a pretty bulky foot, and I do find that it obscures my vision quite a bit, actually. And so if you are one of those people who says, with the regular foot, this AD foot, I really can't see quite clearly where I'm going. You have options. This is a sole, and it can actually pop off just like the sole of the regular shank can pop off. This one, you push towards yourself, just like that, and it kind of slips out the bottom. Okay. It's attached to these little nubbins. There are other options. For instance, there is a open-toed version. There is a stitch in the ditch version. And there is even a 1/4 inch version. So you can have your walking foot on and do a 1/4 inch. When you go to put any of those on, or to put your regular one back on, you take the little nubbins that I mentioned, and they need to slide into the cutouts. There's like a little smile cutout on both sides. Probably easiest to do when the foot is not mounted on the machine, but we'll do it hard mode here and push backwards and it clicks on. There are also alternate walking feet entirely. The whole unit can be changed to what's called a single or an HP walking feet. And that's a discussion for another day. Janome has a good analysis of what those are useful for if you go to their website and search for those accessories. But this is a really good option, and this is what they give you to start. Okay, so that's the walking foot for you, or I should say the AccuFeed foot. We are going to turn off that extra motor by tapping that icon, and it says, okay, if you've changed which specialization I'm on, make sure that you change the foot as well. We're going to take off the AccuFeed foot, and we're going to go on to a little bit of free motion. We're going to need to find the PDH foot, which is the darning foot, and I'll show you a visual aid for what that looks like. This is the foot that I'm talking about. It is metal and has a spring and then has this clear foot on the bottom. Okay, this is a darning foot and it is another full shank foot, and so it is going to slip behind and around that screw, just like the AccuFeed foot did. The little bar at the top goes over the needle screw. So you'll do that at the same time. Notice how the needle screw is underneath that bar. I'll tighten the presser foot screw down. And again, beat this to death, you must tighten with your screwdriver. Extra tighten so it doesn't loosen. Okay. So the darning foot is a free motion foot, and there are multiple options for free motion. This is the basic one. It's the first free motion foot that we ever had. And it is a hopping foot. To set up for free motion, we need to drop our feed dogs, and this is done in different ways on different machines. So if you have a 9480, 9450, 9410, or a Skyline, you're going to be looking over to the side of the machine that had the power cord and the on-off switch. And we're looking for this switch right here, which has engravings by it that show teeth up and teeth down. Flip that switch to teeth down and you'll actually hear the feed dogs disengage. If you have a Continental, you are looking on your screen. Yours is controlled electronically, and you can see a little picture of teeth above a line. And if I tap it, the teeth drop below the line. That's what you're going to do. And you'll hear a quieter disengage option. You can confirm that you have successfully dropped the feed dogs because your recommended foot is going to change to the PDH foot, which conveniently is exactly what we have on right now. Okay. So at this point, you'll need a quilt sandwich. I've got batting and top and backing, and I have an eeny weeny little one, and you can have an eeny weeny little one if you want as well. Okay, so free motion, we're gonna do the very, very basics. The thing about free motion is it just takes practice. There's some, best practices we can recommend, but honestly, it's just putting in the time. To start, we're going to bring our bobbin thread up. When you have a big quilt, it's really hard to peek under it and make sure that the bobbin thread is not tangling back there. So the first thing I do is I go needle down, needle up, and I pull on the top thread, and that forces the bobbin thread tail to come up. And I'm just going to pull some extra out so that I've got maybe 6 inches. Then I'll put my quilt sandwich underneath. I find wherever I want to start, and I do that again. Needle down, needle up, yank on the top thread, and I pull a little loop of bobbin thread up. Now I can hold on to both threads and know that that bobbin thread is not tangling back there. I put my needle in basically right where the threads are coming out of, and I'll just kind of hold those threads off to the side as I go. Okay, so from here, our stitching is going to be all about consistency of speed, both of the needle and the speed of the fabric. I'll show you some bad examples. So I'm going to plant my hands, and let's say that so it does give me a little message the first time I go to start. It says raise feed dogs and start. That is just a little FYI in case you hadn't realized your feed dogs were down. It says, are you sure? Once I hit X, it won't offer me that warning again. Okay, so I push on the foot pedal and we'll start to move. Now, if I do not move the fabric does not move. That is the point of dropping your feed dogs. So I am the one driving the fabric. If I move really, really slow, you can see my stitches get really, really tiny. If I move really, really fast, I get a basting stitch. Neither of those is ideal. There must be a middle ground between the two in which my stitch looks about normal length. So I want to run the needle at a moderate speed, and I want to move my fabric at a moderate speed. This is one time when I love my start-stop button, because the start-stop button is a metronome. It will run the needle at exactly the right speed. I do not have to worry about keeping my foot at an even pressure on the foot pedal. So I'm going to unplug my foot control, set my speed to some sort of middling speed, and then I push the start-stop button and quickly get my hand on the fabric. And now my goal is to figure out how fast do I naturally want to move the fabric. If you are just a speed demon cranking along and you notice your stitches are really long, you better speed up your needle using that speed control slider. If you notice that you want to really slowly move your fabric, you need to slow down your needle so that it matches how fast you're moving your fabric. This is just guess and check. Go ahead and play for like 2 minutes. I'm going to do a little bit of stippling and squiggling, and then we'll touch base. If you hate this, the good news is we're only going to do it for like 30 seconds. And so then you don't have to ever do it again. But I really want you to try so that you can say that you've tried it and you've decided you didn't like it. Good. Let's add some considerations in. So when you are moving, I want you to plant your hands, basically like you're saying field goal, and you're just going to keep them planted in that shape, and they're not going to rotate. I can move 360 degrees, but my field goal is not tipping over. A really common beginner mistake is you rotate and your field goal starts to tip. But guess what? Your results do not look very good when you're rotating like that. If you've painted yourself into a corner and you need to move, then you pause and you move, or you rotate, and then you plant again. You will get better results. Now, if this is feeling really difficult, I will say this is the hardest possible scenario. Number one, you might have a little tiny piece of fabric and you don't have much room for your hands. Number two, I have not given you any grip assists. I didn't give you grippy gloves. You don't have, grippy handles. There's lots of assists that you can get. A really simple one that you can use is clean gardening gloves, and those will help you grip your fabric a little bit better. Also, having a bigger platform would help. So this is the hardest possible scenario. Hopefully you're still managing. This is one option for free motion. And honestly, this is, in my mind, the hardest possible option. So we're going to talk about an alternate option that Janome offers you. If you want to keep playing with this foot for a little bit, go ahead and pause me. But otherwise, we're going to move on. Okay, so what we're going to do is try an alternate foot. And this comes with basically every advanced Janome. And it looks like this. This is the QO. Let me maybe get a background, see if that's more visible. It's plastic. It's got a little circle in it. It's got 2 silver bars on it. And it says, this one says QC, excuse me. QC, quilting foot, closed toe. You also have a QO and a QZ. I will accept those as alternates, but I prefer the QC. Okay, so this foot has a different setup. It does not use, obviously, the darning foot. So that darning foot needs to come off. We unscrew the darning foot. Set that aside. And now find the original shank that I told you not to lose. This is the shank that your A foot, your F foot have been going on to. The QC foot adapts onto this foot. The foot has 2 bars on it. That is not because it has 2 options, 2 positions. Instead, they both get used at the same time. The back bar goes onto a hook that you have on the back left side of the foot. And so we hook that on first, just like that, and then the front clips in. Let me show you that one more time. The back gets hooked on. Let's see. Try not to obscure your view here. And then the front clips forward. This is easiest to do when the shank is off the machine. So I usually do that first. Then I will go ahead and put that shank back on, tightening with the screwdriver. Okay. So we've got a different foot on. We're also going to tell the machine that we have a different foot because it's going to give us some different options to use with this foot. So to prep for this foot, we're going to make our first foray into the t-shirt or sewing applications icon, which we haven't touched yet. And let's briefly talk about what sewing applications is beyond just this free motion example. So basically, sewing applications is more information and more options for certain stitches. It doesn't contain secret stitches. All the stitches that are in here exist elsewhere in the machine, but it might give you more information about when to use them. Here's an example. See on my regular utility section, I've got a stitch 12 here, which is an overcasting stitch, and number 13, number 14, number 15, they all recommend the M foot, which is the overcasting foot. But I wouldn't have any particular idea about why I would use number 15 instead of, say, number 12. When I go to sewing applications, it is going to show me that I have an over edge woven section and an over edge stretch knit and an over edge heavy. And if I go through those, thank you, it says raise feed dogs. We can ignore that for now because we're going to keep free motioning. We're just having a little look around here. And it shows me a couple of those stitches, but it's a woven and it says 2 layers. They're just alternates for 2 layers of woven. Then if I go to over edge knit, I will see different stitches. These are all over edge with the knit fabrics. So again, it's just sorting our fabrics for us and then telling us by categories a little bit more about what it's used for. In the case of the quilting, it's going to give us more options as well. So we'll go to sewing applications and we need to find the quilting category. This can be in different areas. It can be in its own overarching category shown by this sort of heart and feather, or you might just have a category here that says quilt on it. It depends on your machine. I know that on Continentals and on the 9480, it's in this category here. And then we're looking for free motion. If you had to find a category in the original list, it should say something like quilt, and then you're also going to find free quilting or free motion. From here, we have to pick the correct straight stitch. It's not straight stitch 1. You can see that recommends PDH. It's not straight stitch 2, which is PDH, but left aligned. It's not zigzag stitch. It's straight stitch 3 on this particular machine. You can click through your straight stitches until you find the one that recommends QC/QO, which matches what we are doing. Okay. The reason I emphasize this is this gives us a different degree of control. It lets us raise and lower this foot. This foot does not hop. The hopping foot that we had, the darning foot, can raise all the way up and come all the way down, no matter the thickness of your fabric. It's got like a preset lift and drop. The hovering foot does not, and so we have to fine-tune it as necessary. The benefit with this foot, even though it might take a little bit more prep, is you do not have as much drag. The hopping foot hops on your fabric, it steps on it, and so you get this experience of drag. Some people like the drag. They feel like it controls their herky-jerky motion. Some people feel like it's more stressful on their hands, their shoulders. It just makes it harder to move the fabric, in which case you might like the hovering foot. So the first thing you'll do is not adjust anything, and we'll just see how this feels. We want to see if when I sew, gotta make sure I get my bobbin thread, almost had it. There we go. Get my bobbin thread up. When I sew, do I feel like the foot is dragging on the fabric? Maybe the fabric is too high, and so the foot is kind of catching on it. Or maybe I have a really thin fabric and batting, and I feel like the foot is a mile away from the fabric. Let's see. So that actually feels pretty good. And with, a normal batting, like Warm and Natural, the preset is basically good to go. But I'll show you an alternate. We'll pretend that I have a really thick quilt by doubling this quilt up. Just like that. Now I should have a little bit too much drag from that foot. Okay, so I'm pushing a wrinkle of fabric ahead of my foot, and I don't like that. So I can raise the foot. This will be in different locations for different people. Depending on your machine, you might see an icon up here at the top that shows a foot with an up and a down arrow. For my 9480 folks, they have put that in your more options. And again, there's your foot up and down. This is a millimeter value. How high is it above the plate? And so I would raise that up until I felt like it wasn't squishing the fabric anymore. The other thing that can happen is if your foot is too high above the fabric has too much play in it and your stitch looks bad. If that happens, you need to lower the foot. Go ahead and play with that and play with this foot. I'll see you in a couple minutes. Okay, I hope you had fun with your quilting. We are going to go ahead and move on. That was just a little taste of your free motion options. And if you do want to go forward in your free motion journey, there's lots of resources and training for you elsewhere. At this point, we need to reset. So make sure that you re-engage your feed dogs. So if you have a Skyline or a 94 something, you flip that switch on the side. It'll make a noise, but it doesn't pop your feed dogs up, right? They're still down. Do not worry, you have not broken your machine. They will re-engage as soon as you start sewing again. And I can even prove that. You heard them click in there. I rotated my hand wheel and they've come up again. So no worries there. If you have the Continental, remember that you have a icon on the top and it'll have a little picture of teeth and a line, and you'll tap it and the teeth will come up above the line. And what the heck, we can just go back to our utility section and we can confirm that feed dogs are up because we've got that A foot all ready to go. Okay. At this point, we're going to move on to cleaning, maintenance, and settings. So settings real quick, we'll look at our screen. And you remember that you need your gear or your wrench that says set. And we're going to go into the machine settings. So we've talked about quite a few of these. We've turned on thread cut after auto lock. Needle stop position was the first setting that we did. Auto tension is a way to set all of your tensions lower or higher. They'll still adjust relative based on utility stitch, decorative stitch, but they can all be a little bit tighter or a little bit lower if you're using a unique thread or a unique fabric that needs that. Same thing with presser foot pressure. If you're going to be sewing on 2 layers of faux fur for the next week and you always want your presser foot pressure to be lower, you can make it a sort of across the board, no matter what stitch I'm on, all those pressures are going to be lower or higher. This particular machine has a foot height for pivoting, so how high does that foot raise? That won't be available on all machines. Adjustable startup speed is really interesting, and so you can get 2 versions, start stop button and foot pedal. Have you noticed that your machine actually revs up to speed when you start sewing? It'll go jun, 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 up to speed. You can change how fast it revs up to speed, either rev up to speed over more time or rev up to speed much quicker, depending on what you're using and the scenario. So for instance, for free motion, you might want it to rev up to speed slowly because you want to be able to push that start stop button and then get your hand on the fabric. So you can adjust that as needed. Upper thread sensor, that should always be on unless you're using a really thin thread or something's wrong with that sensor, which is very unusual. But if it's telling you that your thread is broken and it's not, you can turn that off temporarily until you're either done with your very thin thread or until you can get into a service center. Remaining bobbin thread, this is not available on every machine. Some of you will have an on-off or an adjustment. And some of you don't have an on-off at all. It's just always on. This will tell you when you're close to running out. I like to keep mine at 0.5. It tells me literally right before the bobbin runs out. I find it's a little overkill if it tells me at 1 or 2. I have a lot of thread left at that point. So I keep mine at 0.5. Boring. Variable zigzag sensitivity, don't even worry about it. You can read in your manual if you want to see what that is. This one has some accurate stitch regulator options. We'll skip those. Favorite stitch adjustment should be on. Resume mode has to do with asking you when you turn the machine on, do you want to go back to what you were doing? I like to keep that off personally. And we're back to the beginning. We saw that the flag is language, and then you've got very basic machine settings that should be really easy to understand. Beeping, brightness, inches versus millimeters. Do you want me to have a screensaver or turn myself off after a given amount of time? And then are my lights on? Background color, touchscreen calibration. If I notice that I have to touch over here to hit OK, I need to recalibrate my touchscreen, and you just follow the prompts there. Resetting the machine, or those are both resets, format and reset to all defaults. Okay, so that's our quick and dirty review of settings. Let's go on to cleaning and maintenance. To clean and maintain the machine, you are not required to do anything on the top of the machine. There's no oiling points, there's no brushing. If you're lucky, your machine has a little hinge here and it opens up the side cover. Not all of the machines will do that. That's just so that you can get eyes on here if you've got a thread tangled, but you're not meant to oil anything, unscrew anything in here. You are meant to clean and maintain under your plate. So that is what we are going to go over. Taking your stitch plate off varies by machine. If you have a 94 something or a Skyline, you're going to take off your accessory table to reveal the free arm, and in particular, a little switch on the free arm. You're going to push firmly down on there, and the plate pops up, and you can pull it out. If you have a Continental machine, this is done on the screen. So you can see off to the right here, we've got our series of icons, and at the bottom there is a key. This is called your lockout key, and I tap that, and it locks the machine. For instance, if I was going to run away and do something else, and the puppy's in the room, and you don't want the puppy to step on the foot pedal, and so you can lock your machine. We are interested in this icon here that shows the plate lifting. Push that, and it demagnetizes the plate. I do have to grab it kind of quick because it will magnetize itself back down if I don't grab it. Okay, now either way, go ahead and take your plate off. We'll go back to my 9480 for the rest of the demo. And we can go ahead and take our bobbin out. And your bobbin will sort of take the bobbin basket with it, which is what I wanted. We want to take that bobbin basket out as well. Underneath, you will see that you will accumulate lint, and this is a great example. I've got a little bit of lint in there. So we can just brush, brush, brush. Q-tip works great. They do give you a lint brush with this machine. I've got this, basic paintbrush right here. Brush, brush, brush. You can also check in between your feed dogs. You'll get little bits of lint, so you can kind of scooch those out. You can also use a vacuum if you truly have an ungodly amount of lint. I don't want you to use compressed air. Not canned air, not compressed air. Canned air has moisture in it that will rust parts of the machine. Compressed air is simply, it's too forceful. It blows some lint out, but it blows a lot of lint down into the machine. And your service person can totally tell when you've used compressed air in here because there is lint packed along the belts and the gears, and it's hard to get out. Okay, so brush, brush, brush. You might see some thread poking out from this apparatus. This is your thread cutter here. And while we're down here, we can go ahead and oil. Now there's different oiling options depending on your machine. This one, like many Janomes, has a wick right here at the very center of the bullseye. There is a moist sponge looking thing right here, okay? That is a wick. If you pull it out thinking it's lint, it's like 1 inch long, and it's meant to oil this central thing right here, this shaft. If you do not have a wick, it is okay. You should just have a central silver piece, and you'll notice it stays still while everything rotates around it. And you just need to put a drop of oil in the seam between the stationary and the rotational point. You're going to use modern sewing machine oil. What I mean by that is it is less than 5 years old. If it's more than 5 years old, it's suspect. It's meant for domestic sewing machines, not industrial sewing machines, not featherweight sewing machine oil, domestic sewing machine oil. And yes, it has to be for sewing machines, not cooking oil, not motorcycle oil. Okay, couple of drops, say every couple of weeks. It's not something that you have to do every day, every other day, not at all. It's just every couple of weeks if you happen to have it on hand. If you never oil, honestly, it's not the end of the world. You should just get your machine maintained every year by a service center. Okay, once you've cleaned and gotten your eyeballs on, the different parts down there, we're gonna go over putting the bobbin basket back in. And this is really where people get into trouble. And this is why we do this activity. Couple alignments I want you to notice about your bobbin basket. This one happens to have numbers printed on it, and that's great because those are going to be straight across, left to right, no tilt at all when this is in correctly. We also have an opening up here at the top. That's where your needle goes in. If you were ever to put this in and there wasn't an opening for your needle, you can imagine you're going to have a bad time and hit your needle against it. Finally, I want you to notice that there is a little thumb, as I call it, right here, a little nubbin. And that sits to the left of this spring, just like this. Boing, 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 boing. That's the alignment I'm looking for. The rest of the basket is going to sit flat on that hook race. We're going to tuck in the top. The top goes under a little seat belt. And then I just put that nubbin to the left of that spring, and it lays in nice and flat. I'll know I did this correctly because, again, the nubbin is left of the spring. It's level. I can't unlevel it by tapping on one side or the other. And I see an even amount of rim around here and around here. If you see a lot of rim on one side and no rim on the other, or very little, you've done it wrong. And this one, again, would be unlevel. So I need to back up a little bit and get that sitting level on the hook race. Okay, once I think I have it correct, I can go ahead and pop my plate back on. For both types of machines, you tuck the left side in. If you have a Continental, it magnetizes down. Any other machine, push. And then it's always going to tell you, hey, you've maybe changed something. Just make sure that you're aware that this is a zigzag plate, let's say. It just gives you a little warning on screen. To check that I put the bobbin basket in correctly, I will rotate the hand wheel to move my needle all the way down, turn towards yourself with that hand wheel, all the way up. If you did it wrong, you will hit something with your needle, or it will make a weird noise, or it will feel really hard to turn your hand wheel. Any of those things means that you did that wrong and you need to try again. Otherwise, you're good to pop your bobbin in, and now you've done your first cleaning and oiling. Good job. Okay, so at this point, we are going to zoom out and touch base and do a little closing statement. Okay, so your machine should all be back assembled together, plates back on, I've put my regular shank back on, and you're basically ready to go about your normal utility sewing. We really appreciate you following along with this mastery. I hope it was helpful. I know we didn't touch every single stitch, every single part of the machine, but really we touched the big ones that I personally use every single day. I think it'll get you a really good start with your machine. Do keep an eye out in the coming months. We're hoping to get some more of these mastery videos out to cover the breadth of the Janome lineup. So if you've got a different machine, keep an eye out. I might do a feature on your particular machine. Otherwise, we're so happy that you stopped by the Quilting Bee YouTube page, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one.